Well, welcome everyone. I'm Del Hornbuckle, broadcasting from sunny Fresno. Welcome to the 10th episode of mini.Futures podcast, showcasing the amazing past of miniatures and dollhouses, but also looking to the future and where the art and inspiration are going. My guest today is San Francisco-based Lauren Dodge, who is a product designer,
Yep.
Multimedia artist, oddities enthusiast, and a newly minted miniaturist.
Yeah.
Very, very much minted.
Yeah.
In university, she studied theater design and psychology, two fields in which she never worked directly, yet have been far more applicable to her professional and creative endeavors than she ever expected. As a product designer, she builds connected experiences aiming at making people's lives a little bit better and brighter. Having recently taken a role as Stitch, I know that company,
All
where she
right.
hopes to make apparel shopping more inclusive and fun for folks. That's really great. Like
Thank
most
you.
of us, COVID has given her a lot more indoor time apart from friends and family. Looking for a fun distraction, she bought a dollhouse kit on a whim and a bunch of Southern Gothic books. That's great to keep her busy. It has indeed kept her busy. So join me in welcoming Lauren. Lauren, this is just great. I've been looking forward to this. How are you doing, and how's the weather in San Francisco?
Oh, Del, it's so fantastic. Thank you so much for having me today. I've been really looking forward to chatting with you. And the fact that you're in Fresno, I'm in San Francisco, so we're in the same time zone.
Yeah, it
Um,
makes it easier.
yeah, it does. It does, but it's really good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Great, great. Well, let's just jump right into it. So, tell me all about Lauren. What's your background, your daily life, and of course, how did the miniature bug bite you?
Yeah, absolutely. This is always one of those hard questions, right? Um, yeah, so I was born in the Bay Area, but I grew up in Austin, Texas. And then I came back out to California about 10 years ago. And I really love San Francisco. It's such a great space for cultivating creativity. I am in the tech world at the same time, so I know that there's a little bit of between tech and art. It's an interesting space to kind of explore in this time period. So it's been really cool. But this dollhouse, so I really love Halloween. It's my absolute favorite holiday, as you might surmise. And so usually every year I make these really big, very involved Halloween parties, and I will plan them for months. I usually start planning them
Wow,
by June or July, and that's
wow.
me just like making the theme and like making all the props, and then I put it all together, and it's just one night, and then boom, it's all done. And I wasn't really able to do that this year because
Mm,
of COVID, and so having a background in set design, which I don't really actually use, but now I guess I kind of am. I really had an itch to continue and thinking through like another theme to explore. And Southern Gothic is really interesting. It hints on some horror, but it's really rooted in the tragedies and atrocities and the crumbling like nature of aristocracy and all sorts of these really interesting, juicy concepts that I'm not an expert on just yet, but it's really given me like an opportunity to bring some focus into um, the kind of art that I really want to explore and the kind of people that I want to connect with. So it's been really interesting.
that's very interesting. It's yeah, that's really interesting. And I think I follow you, and as I think I mentioned to you, three of the other miniaturists I interviewed mentioned you as a favorite
Aw.
site to follow. Well, for that very reason, how there's incredible art, but there's also a narrative and something that you're weaving in your work,
Yeah,
and it's so evident. It's the fridge. I saw the refrigerator the other
thank
day, and I thought,
you.
oh my goodness, I've got to just go back and study that.
Yeah.
That
Oh,
was
thank you.
amazing. Yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
amazing.
I've really had such an amazing time because when I started this, like I mentioned, I got a kit and I was thinking through like what I wanted to do with it because I'm super new to this, and I just got on Instagram and I started messaging a lot of artists because I find that the best way to learn is to ask, and a lot of them have been so open and giving with their time and their expertise. And so the further that I've gotten into it, it's been really great to be able to pay that forward and pay that back
Yes.
And I get a lot of messages from folks being like, I never thought I'd go into dollhouses, but now I just bought my dollhouse. And I'm so open. I'm like, oh my gosh, please, like, tell if you have any questions. I'm not going to promise I know all the answers, but I've made enough mistakes now to have learned
Sure,
something.
sure, sure, sure.
But yeah, it's been really great connecting with everyone. I feel really blessed.
Yeah. So it started with a kit. You actually built a kit, and then sort of
Yeah,
it became
yeah.
its own thing.
Yeah,
Wow.
like because I like I mentioned, I was like, I know I wanted to do something kind of spooky. How I actually got into miniatures was
Mm.
when I was searching for oddities because I love oddities on Etsy. I found this one miniature oddity cabinet that was a kit, and it's by this artist named Lady Delaney. I call her my miniaturist godmother because she's truly the first one that really inspired me to get into it. So I bought that. And I had so much fun, like figuring out how I can make, these little interesting oddities fit within a scaled space. And
Wow.
I had this idea, I was like, I want to actually make like an oddity case of oddity cases. um, and so buying the kit on a whim, I was like, I could fill it with all sorts of stuff. It really, if you get into dollhouses and miniatures, as you have, and as you
Yeah.
probably know,
Oh yeah.
it snowballs, right? It
Oh yeah.
becomes like more of an obsession because
That's
you learn
exactly
how
right.
to be like a woodworker, you learn how to be an electrician, you learn how to be a painter, like all of these skill sets, and then you make them all small. It's really cool. Yeah, I love it.
It's your own fantasy world.
It
I'm
is.
convinced of that. That's why it's just exploded. And I just think it's interesting with the COVID. I've heard several people say the same thing. Oh, I was at home and someone gave me a kit, and you'd already been thinking about these things. So there it is.
Yeah.
Well, what else? What else is? You've kind of answered my next question about the origin of Southern Gothic dollhouse. But what's unique about it? Because
Oh,
you're definitely in that genre. Like I told you, I've got this spooky, creepy genre going that I've seen.
yeah. So there are a couple things. So I've been like looking at the dollhouse world, and I've been looking at like the diorama world and like scaled models world, and the train world and the doll world. And I really find there's a lot of overlap, but there are still these very distinct spaces. And I love when I look at diorama artists, I'm just incredibly floored by the level of detail that they bring to their
Yes,
work, and the weathering, and really how realistic everything looks. And I love the idea of bringing that level of detail into a dollhouse, like into something that's so big. Because usually that the diorama things are more like quarter scale, or they're much smaller scale.
right.
So it's interesting to think of like actually in doing that, I feel like I've almost bit off more than I can chew because it really is it's such a big project. But then like on the flip side, doll houses have an interesting historical significance. And I've also noticed there's like a gender disparity between like doll houses and dioramas. And when you
Yes.
like use terms like dollhouse or miniature, like it's very feminine and girly. And I feel like a lot of men don't even want to touch it, right? And so I that whole thing is really interesting in itself, and like how we consider dollhouses to be gendered at
Yes.
all.
Yes. Yes.
And so then when I take all of those things and I think about how I want to like use this as a medium to explore something like the Southern Gothic. And with the Southern Gothic genre, there comes a lot of things like race, gender, sexuality issues, all these things that have historical significance.
Mhm.
And there, like I mentioned, I'm not an expert in this space, and I'm really trying to, especially like as a white artist, trying to understand where my lane is, and what I should and how I should be expressing attitude around particular issues. And so putting things out there, um, I'm getting really awesome feedback from people, and I'm finding I can learn a whole lot based off of having good intentions, putting it out there, and then having it reflected back. The Southern Gothic genre is it can be a minefield in
Oh
terms of
yeah.
bringing up a lot of those things. And as an artist, trying to make sure my commentary is one that acknowledges the toxicity of the things without fetishizing or diminishing it by putting it in dollhouse form. So I'm trying to find that balance. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm learning. Some bruises along the way, but I'm learning. I'm
Wow.
trying.
That's so thoughtful, yeah, reflective in your, and I think it's reflected in your artwork. Also, some of your posts, you've mentioned some authors. So talk about, and there's some of my favorites, but I want you to
Yeah,
talk about them.
absolutely. So there are, I would say, three big favorites of mine. Flannery O'Connor and
Yes.
Shirley Jackson. I mean, Shirley Jackson to me is, I feel like, my number one. Toni Morrison, I absolutely adore. She's just like such a goddess. And I mentioned like these female authors because I've also recognized in Southern Gothic literature, so much of it is actually written by white men. Um, and so I'm trying to actually find more like Black authors in the Southern Gothic genre so I can try to get better perspective. But what I really like about these authors in particular is shedding light on what it is like to not be a white man in the South, and what is that perspective. How can that perspective be acknowledged or reflected in the piece, especially like from my perspective as a woman, for example, and how this house is, how I'm kind of envisioning this house is the study in Southern Gothic, or in a lot of old Southern literature, is considered to be a very like masculine space.
Yeah.
Women are now not really allowed to be in. And so I'm putting a woman in the study, and she's the one who's writing the stories. And I'm having a painting commissioned of Shirley Jackson and Flannery O'Connor to be put in as the portrait in the study,
Wow.
and then the rest of the house is a, a, a reflection of the books that I read, but also just general themes that I'm trying to show. So they're a little bit more fantastical, and the study is very realistic.
Wow. Wow, you're blowing my mind, each answer. We're not even at the third question. This is just great. No, I'm loving it. No, 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 I'm
Oh,
loving it.
I'm glad.
Well, that's interesting. So you're a San Francisco-based product designer. You grew up in the South, and you're self-described horror nut, and it obviously inspired by Southern Gothic literature. Well, talk a little bit, and you've touched on it obviously, but talk about the intersection um, and creating miniatures. There's an intersection of the worlds, and then you're creating art. How are you navigating all of that?
Absolutely, absolutely. So and I when I think of how I can tackle a problem, right? So this is the product designer in me.
Mhm.
Okay, I need to find a focus. And what you usually do is you distill all of these ideas, like just things that have inspired you, into how might we's. How might we show the audience X? How might we be able to best effectively do X? And from there, you think of all of these potential solutions, and then you narrow those down into things that are going to be able to get your ideas across. And so maybe like as other artists, I feel, sometimes with things I'll just do it and I'll put it out there and I don't really care what people have to say about it. But this
Mhm,
one's
mhm.
different. This one has been really great in that, I ask a question to that my followers, and I have like, please help me kind of figure this out. I don't know much about it. And then I get a lot of response back, and I take that response and I consider it. A lot of them are things I hadn't even known anything about, so I'll go and research it, and I'm like, boom, I have a freezer pet.
Yeah,
It's not
that.
something that would have existed because I didn't know about them, right? So, and it's really interesting. It's that dialogue that I'm able to have with folks, and then like, how can I actually reflect not just what I think Southern Gothic is, but how can I reflect what everyone thinks Southern Gothic is. So I'm doing this thing where there are some artists that I really admire. I mean, who typically, I think for the most part, paint, and we're talking about painters here, paint larger mediums. And
Mhm.
I've asked if they'd be open and interested in making me small art. And and most of them have been super gracious, but I just asked, the only prompt is, can you please, within like a 2-inch space, show me what you feel Southern Gothic is, right? And then I'm going to be making an art gallery with all of these pieces,
Wow.
because I love the idea of this not, it's really not me. I'm trying to have it be a reflection of literature and others. So I don't know if that really answered your question. It's
No, it
probably
did.
pretty meandering,
It,
but
it must it
it's
most certainly did. Yeah,
cool.
it did. Yeah, and your work is complex, and there are just layers to it, and what you've just described. And part of the creative process is problem solving. You touched on that, so talk about that because creating art is problem solving. I believe that.
Yeah, yeah. So typically, what I do is I go by what they call the double diamond model, and how that works is you diverge, converge. So the
Ah,
first diamond is your problem space. You need to take in all of the information, just read, right? Like read a lot, read articles, talk to people, ask questions, all those things, and then you start kind of seeing patterns from that, right? And you can start seeing some focus into some of the themes maybe that you want to go in the direction of, and you can start putting them in little buckets. And that would be the converge. So you diverge, get the info, converge, you start putting them in patterns. And then for the delivery aspect, the second diamond is that you start thinking about all of the ways that you can solve these problems, or explore the spaces that you just found.
wow.
And that is, all of your ideas, and then you converge again, and you focus on delivering it and making it happen. With product design, uh, after you go through that double diamond, it's not the end. The very end is then get feedback and put it back into the loop. And so there's this one artist. Her name is Robbie McCauley. She is a performance artist. I believe she was a professor at Emory, and she had a play called Sally's Rape, which was discussing. It was like a monologue about how her ancestors were slaves, and where she has come from is from originates from that. So what she would do with this piece is she would go and perform it, and at the very end she would open discussion and have people talk, and she would take the stuff that she learned, put it into her piece, and then take it to another city and then perform that. So by the end of it, it was like a reflection of all of the, like it was a growing thing that got feedback and continued to grow. And I really admire that. I thought that was just the coolest idea, to be able to bring others into your piece like that. So
Wow. That's an amazing process, and again, I think it's really obvious. It's so intentional. I guess is what I'm saying with your art, your miniature art, and it shows. Your
thank
posts are
you.
very interesting, and also I'll say that what I enjoy also about your posts. First of all, the images are just. I'm always a little shocked, but I love it. I love it. So, but you always have sort of your description. I always make sure I read, and there's either a story or some reference to something. I think that's what your followers really love. It's really
Thank you.
it's a great
Thank you.
experience. Great
Thank
experience.
you.
So yeah, and that's a complexity. So this is that moment. Okay, we talked about so show some of those miniatures and talk about them,
Sure.
and this is your
Yeah,
moment.
you bet. Okay, I've got the swamp tub. I have a couple here that I'll share. One of the leaves fell off.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So this exists
Oh my
within
goodness.
in the bathroom. Um, so in thinking through, how can I represent all of the different things that exist in Southern Gothic? The swamp is a huge one, right? Like the
Yes.
swamp represents, secrets and mystique. The swamp is the South's forest, like, the how the forest is referred to in all these fairy tales. It's a very spooky place. And it's full of danger and
Yes.
of lots of secrets. And so, and thinking about, how many people must probably have been dumped in the swamp in these stories, to try to keep their, or things that have been dumped in the swamp. This is definitely what that represents, is not just the thing that's been put in the swamp, but that secrets never die and they never stay where they're supposed to be. So this was made out of, this is actually a soap dish that you can
Ah,
get on the internet for like $8 to $11. and I aged it with a blackening solution, like a brass black. I popped on a faucet that I found probably on eBay, like really cheap. And then with everything else, I used polymer clay. So yeah, it's, I think some wire is in there just to give it a little shape, but that's it for the most part. So there's
Well,
that guy.
what's the water? What's the
Oh yeah,
water
sorry, it's
water
resin.
part?
Yeah,
Oh,
it's epoxy resin. So
yes.
I probably could have made it just a little bit less opaque, but it if
Wow.
you take some chalk, what do you call it? Pastel, and you kind of shave it in there and you mix it up. It helps give color to the resin. But it's you should always wear a mask and you should always wear gloves when you do it. I'm not always the best at being safe when I get into my stuff, but I highly recommend exploring the fun of resin. You can make. Ooh, I
Yes.
have another thing I can kind of show. I mean, it's mostly in the dollhouse, so I'll have to get a little one so I don't have to get up. So these are like just little dribbles. Here, I'll actually show this. These are little dribbles. Whoop.
Oh my goodness.
Little dribbles on the sink, which are
Wow.
movable. And they're just little drops of resin. But resin is really great for water in particular. And if you want to encapsulate anything in the resin. And you can paint the resin if you have molds, paint them to make a bunch of little things, all sorts of applications. So I
Wow.
got that. And then so I'm working on, this is all work in progress, but I'm working on the fireplace slash altar.
I
So,
love that.
so this, so as I'm doing a lot of reflection in literature, but I'm also trying to spin a story from all of these elements to make a unique one as well. And so when I think of like sharp objects with the mom who has Munchausen's by proxy, and her daughter, and then like looking through news articles, this says bride 14 goes home to mother. So thinking through like what could a story have been with the little girl who is probably not little anymore, but the mother murdered her and put her in the cellar of the house. Like, what does that whole relationship look like? What was really neat about this piece is, I think I got this on eBay or Etsy. It's an original painting, but it was from a catalog in the 70s or 80s, I believe. Someone had mentioned that.
Wow.
So when I put that up there, people were like, you should definitely have the doll that's in the painting. And so on Instagram, I, posted like, I'm really bad at anything that has to do with fabric or dolls. And I asked if someone could help me. And immediately when I woke up the next morning, someone had already made the doll. And I could not believe it. It was one of those moments of like the kindness of some
The
people is
generosity. Yeah.
just the generosity
That's
is really,
amazing. That's an amazing piece. Oh my
thank
goodness.
you.
So pull up the
Yeah,
sink for a second. Pull up that sink. How did you,
sure.
again, I'm interested because I'm trying to really embrace that technique because I've noticed everything. That's what I think I really like. When I see images where you've done the aging, and I think I've resisted that because I'm
Oh
afraid
yeah.
to jump into it. But look at that. It's
Oh
beyond
yeah.
rusted.
Okay.
It's
So this is called a chipping technique, and I found this from a lot of diorama artists who do like weathering on metal. So a lot of if you look up techniques and I can share some links with you of my favorite, but some folks who do like on old tanks, right? Like what does enamel look like when it's been aged a little bit? And this is actually paint that is put on, and I'll send you the links to all the paint that I use too. But Vallejo has like a whole weathering kit where you can
wow.
get all of these things, and it really like adds a little bit extra to it. I'm
Oh my
still
goodness.
heavy handed with this stuff, but yeah, it's been super fun.
And it looks burnt. It not only just rusted, but burnt, and it's this whole other, and it
Thank
goes back to that
you.
decaying space kind of thing. That's an amazing
Yeah.
piece. Yeah,
This
love that.
is the last one that I can show you. I mean, I have the piano, but I think I'll show you the fridge. All right.
Oh,
So
that's
speaking of
oh
aging,
man.
right? really disgusting. So in here is that freezer pet I was telling you about. Feel like it needs some backstory. There's some stuff that might be kind of confusing. It's very common for folks to keep their pets in the freezer, especially if passed away and they aren't able to bury them because the ground is too hard, or they
Really?
or yeah, or they haven't been able to emotionally get to that space yet. They're not ready to let them go. There's lots of reasons why we have kept pets in the freezer, and hundreds of people, I'm telling you, hundreds of people have shared their freezer pet story. And it's one of those things that reminds me that you know although I've never heard of it before at all, we all share, and it's like, and to vocalize is, and to normalize something like that, which might immediately feel very odd and strange. It helps bring us together and makes us feel less alone, because more people than you would think do the weird human things that we do. And then another bit in here.
Well, let me ask you, so are you saying this is people are doing this now? This is a common
Yes, and
practice now?
in fact, Petal is based off of an actual cat who was, at the time I was making it, in the freezer. And her owner was very kind in letting me use her likeness. I asked if she'd be able, because I love the name Petal,
Yeah.
and I like the idea of it being based off of something in reality. She was
Oh
very
my
sweet and
gosh.
open about it. The other thing that I learned too is, if you see in there, I don't know how well you can see it. Maybe I can.
Yeah, I can see. I
There's
can
a
see.
little hummingbird.
Wow.
Another story I was getting, a lot of people have kept hummingbirds in their freezer, very specifically. I think it's something about the beauty of the bird and wanting to preserve it, and maybe have it stuffed, but not knowing where to go, or forgetting. Yeah, it's really
Wow.
interesting.
That piece is amazing.
Thank you. So the other thing about this piece, and something that I am struggling to figure out where how I can be a better ally and be an artist that is really fully understanding, is this, since it is a Southern Gothic house, acknowledging Black pain, transgression, and suffering. And because I feel like this is a very important aspect of Southern Gothic. It's ugly, and when I think of Gothic and Southern Gothic in general, I think of everything is decaying because of how toxic it truly is. And so I have articles on here that are referring to real incidences that are very painful and very violent. But I'm still trying to find a balance between acknowledging a thing in a piece and also, what's the word, perpetuating violence just by
Yes.
seeing this stuff on the fridge. And so, I posted this, and I've gotten a lot of really great feedback. I think I angered some people, which is completely valid, right? So, because what I'm trying to do is put it out there and learn from it and see how I can evolve and be a better artist. I still don't know where my lane is in the space. So I urge anyone who's watching this, want to reach out to me and have these kinds of discussions. I'm very open to it and
Mhm.
interested.
So are people doing that? Are you? It sounds like you're communicating a lot there. So are they doing that,
Yeah,
sharing stories?
yeah.
Oh,
They are. People are reaching out, and they're being very communicative about it. I think there are some really sensitive topics that are very triggering to people, and I'm not sure how long they followed my progress, or seen the kind of research that I'm trying to do. And so they lashed out at me, and I'm very happy to be the receiver of that. That's okay. Um, but I think it's just the nature of the space that I'm exploring. So
yes, absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. And I like that you've included social issues and the intersection. You're right. We talked about both growing up in Texas. When you talk about Texas, or not Texas, the South, I think the
yeah,
South in general, you have to talk about both communities. You can't
yeah.
just talk about being African American and not talk about being a white American, growing up in the South, because the two, just the worlds are just. They've
I think,
intersected on so many levels. Absolutely.
yeah, and I think that like I'm really trying not to focus on black pain, but there was, I feel like, a lot of black pain that existed. So it's a space that I'm trying to figure out where it makes sense for me to include it, right?
Yes,
And I do wonder too, because like when I think of like Southern Gothic literature and like all these things exist within it, like To Kill a Mockingbird, right? Like it's a very painful situation, and like where when is it okay and when is it not okay? I think for like a white artist or an author to write about particular topics, and then also where um, how can I learn more of that without um, burdening anybody with educating me? So I'm sorry, I'm just kind of I'm going off and I'm spewing stuff. I am
No.
very much trying to find my space, and
Yeah.
it's been a
Yeah.
journey.
Right, right. And using art to do that.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Well, shoot, thanks so much. Thanks so much for sharing. I know you got far more treasures there, but
No,
that's
I
people can go to
appreciate
your
it.
space. Yeah. Well, shifting gears just a bit, what can you share about the miniature world where you live in glorious San Francisco on a local level? How does the city inspire you? And what in your,
Oh.
daily surroundings inspires you to create?
Well, I suppose we all live in very small spaces, so it's only makes sense for me to recreate small spaces, right? I think that it's actually more of how I'm influenced by San Francisco and how I'm trying to fight that influence because I love Victorian
Ah,
architecture. I really do.
you
I
do.
love it, and that's one of the reasons why I live here. It's really beautiful. And when I think through the architecture and the space of, say, like a Southern Gothic house, they're not really necessarily Victorian per se. I think that some in Louisiana. It's a very specific New Orleans style.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
I'm always finding myself having to fight against what I like and what I prefer, and trying to be more accurate in the architecture that I'm exploring. Yeah. But actually, I would say, there have been a few artists here that have been really wonderful to get in contact with. Um, and I'm really excited about the COVID situation clearing up so we can actually
Oh,
meet in
yes.
person. Yeah.
So you love the painted ladies.
Mm,
Um,
I
those are
do.
just great.
Yeah. I used to live in one of them
Oh,
actually.
wow.
Not the actual painted ladies on in Alamo Square, but I lived in the Haight where there was a lot of those painted
Oh,
ladies
yes.
happening. Yeah, funky place.
That's a great neighborhood.
Yeah.
That's a great neighborhood. Well, you have over, Lauren, you have over 40,000 followers on Instagram. How did you feel when you started getting recognition and attention for your talent and skill?
Um, that number, so numbers on social media are so interesting, because you look at it and you're like, when you really think about how many people that would be that are watching you, I am a little like I'm literally just a girl in my underwear making a dollhouse. I don't even like go out to go to grocery stores often, obviously, as I used to, and so um, it feels like it's like a fantasy number, I guess. But
Yes, yes.
I think the really the best part of having um, a larger platform is just connecting with more people and having more voices and opinions and perspectives. I've gotten to meet I can't believe, honestly, I was talking to my friend about this and she was like, it's obvious because but I'm having like archaeologists and historians and CSI folks and all these people with these incredible backgrounds, and they're chiming in with some like really like amazing authentic like delicious material, and I can't believe I have access to people who are actually interested in in like responding to me about this. So it feels kind of neat in that as a designer who works for a living and solving other problems, um, having interest in something that is truly just a project that excites me and interests me, and I'm not doing anything for money, and I'm just doing it, that people are connecting with it. That's really cool.
Mhm. And yeah, the number is just, you're absolutely right. It's just a number, but it's again, it's a narrative. It's a storytelling because you're always telling a story with your
Thank
images.
you.
So yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
that's it's a lot of different interests there. But tell me at least the types of miniatures. Who do you really admire? Like what types are they? All kind of the spooky, creepy, decaying
Oh,
mansion world?
I always admire people who dance by the beat of their own drum, who are, making, because it just is like pouring out of them. I really love finding folks who have a very specific style, like, and it's their, but it's also their very own style. That is just really incredible, and it's hard to explain. But I will definitely, I have a list of some of these folks that I'd like to share with you. I really also admire folks who really pay attention to the detail. Because when I think about when I was younger, and I would look at miniatures, and I've always loved them. I always think they're interesting. Um, it's like it's the little scratch on a thing, or a penny that has a little dust on it, or there's something that it really, that's where the magic lives. It's when you look at a particular thing and you've seen that the artist really considered it. It um it it sparks your own imagination around, like, well, if they're intentional about that, why are they intentional about it? And then you can really be pulled into that. So definitely, folks who pay attention to that detail.
Well, you've talked about some of your favorite authors. Any human scale artists, designers who influence your work that you really like?
Frances Glessner Lee, probably, for the most
Oh,
part. And if y'all don't know who I'm referring to, she is what they consider to be the godmother of modern forensics. Back in the day, she used to make these. Have you heard of her before?
yes, I
She's incredible.
have.
Yes, of course you have. I know
I,
you have.
I plan
Um,
to do a podcast at some point, just kind of
oh,
a story on her. I really, oh
I
yes, I certainly
love
have.
that. Oh yes, please share that with me. I would love to hear it.
Yeah.
But yes, so for those listening who don't know who she is, she would make these little crime scenes in miniature, and they help forensic detectives. I'm sorry, this is not my space, but she would help murder detectives look for clues and piece them together, and there would be a right answer, like a little cheat sheet around why she did those things. So there are lots of books around this. There's the nut case studies, I believe that they're called, or nutshell studies. um, and it has like all of her stuff, and then it in a photo, but then it also has something superimposed that shows you where all of the correct answers are, so you can for yourself go through and see if you can figure out what happened, with a little cheat sheet in the back. It's super cool. Yeah. Yeah, so I would say that she's my big number one in terms of influence. And as far as I feel like I'm inspired by so many people that it's really hard to pinpoint. But anything that has to do with finding those details and making those details matter and weave a story, I definitely am inspired by how she did that.
Well, who's helped you get here and giving you the space and the support to live this miniature passion?
Oh, my husband,
No.
he's so wonderful. He's
Hearing
so
a lot about spouses, hearing a
I
lot about spouses.
He's so wonderful. So I mean, because we're locked in this house together, right, for COVID, and we've got to learn a lot about each other, and we're both very project oriented people. And he's working on his car downstairs. He's working on building a computer. He's an engineer,
Mm.
and so he's really given me just the space, and I mean, really, truly the space. Like, let me work, on this thing, but also he's so sweet. And like when I open up some of my packages, he's just sitting there waiting to see, what signature I'm going to open. And I love that. So he's really interested, and he's always been my cheerleader there, especially when I explore some controversial topics. And like, he's there to tell me when I'm wrong. He's there to support me when he feels like I'm right. I adore him. He's which is good because I'm married to him. So, you know, I would definitely say him.
That's great. That's great. What's one common myth about miniatures and dollhouses? And what do you have to share to dispel it? You definitely touched on it, but I always just like to ask that question to hear what the artist, what your answer is.
Yeah, that miniatures. I think I'll go back to this. That miniatures and dollhouses are just for girls. They're just for little girls. They're for adults. They're for boys. They're for non-binary. They can be for everybody. Because truly, what it is a small representation of a thing. It's a house, and houses are there are lots of dollhouse designers that are interested in the modern aesthetic. There are a lot of spooky ones, and I'm seeing more and more, and I love to see that because that is just kind of the stuff that I'm more into. um, and it's not just houses. There are all sorts of scaled things you can get into. So I think I would, and the other one is that it's hard and overwhelming, and I know it looks overwhelming, and I know that it might feel like it's impossible to get to a certain level that you want. But it is a lot easier than you might think, and it's really just a matter of learning techniques. Talking with artists, bothering them sometimes, which is totally okay, and just trying and just doing. And there are lots of things that I have failed at doing. I cannot build a hairbrush for the life of me, so I bought one. I know that I'm not very good at making dolls, so I reach out and I get that help and support. Not all of the things that I have are handmade by myself, and I'm very keen to bring attention to that. So just do it, just try it. Not to take over the interview or anything, but I do
No,
have
no,
another
no.
question for you since you're a librarian, and I would really love to hear this. What are some of your favorite Southern Gothic books and authors, and if you could tell me like a little bit about why that is, I would love to hear that.
Sure. And I don't know if it's expressed in the miniature art, my miniature art. But I think that one of my favorites, and I'm not sure he fits into this, but I think so. But absolutely, William Faulkner.
Oh
Would he
yeah.
fall in that? Oh
Hmm.
yeah. I just the short stories alone.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely, we're head to head with Shirley Jackson. Shirley
Yeah.
Jackson just kind of course, Flannery O'Connor.
Yeah.
But Shirley Jackson, absolutely, some of the
Yeah.
greatest short stories ever written, I think. So
Yeah.
yeah,
William Faulkner. So, A Rose for Emily is
yes.
actually, I would say, it's going to be the bedroom. I'll be making the Rose for Emily bedroom. But when I think of like the through story, right, and like how I want the house to kind of, I think of that character so much, and I think about how, and I see this in like Rose for Emily. I see it in To Kill a Mockingbird. Like what's behind the doors of the house that has a lot of gossip about. Um, we've always lived in the castle. Like what's
Oh
going on
yes.
behind those
Oh
doors. And so when I think about like what would she have been doing for all of that time by herself, how she would be spending her time, what do her things look like, and then the girls in We've Always Lived in the Castle, thinking of after the story is done, after all of that damage has been inflicted, how are they living the rest of their life? Which is it's the sad part, and maybe it's the morbid part that I'm so drawn to, but it is interesting. It's important to look at that stuff. That's really
yeah.
great. Thank you for that.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. I had to look this up, so I don't know her husband. So, because I knew I had something wrong here. A Field Guide to American Houses by Virginia McAllister.
Okay, great. Thank
And so
you.
the first she kind of wrote with the husband. I remember the husband was there, and then the next edition it's just her. But it's definitely you can find it. There's a newer one, but you can Amazon, eBay, whatever you use, get that original one because
Okay.
she has gone back, and I think you're absolutely right. Where I think it's Beaux Arts, and I see them here even in Fresno. It's kind of turn of the century. It's not quite Victorian, but it's absolutely if you go to a city like New Orleans, I know exactly the
Yeah.
style you're talking about. And she's just, it's definitive, the history, everything, and the famous homes to look for.
Ugh, I
It's
love
just,
it. so
It's just
much.
mesmerizing, yeah. And so another part of the miniature piece for me is I really am interested, for me at least, for the artists who are really looking at the architectural design. And you're not seeing a lot of that. So yes, people are building kits, but there are a few out there who are really kind of designing what dollhouses I think
Yeah.
should look like the next 20 years, and you don't see a lot of
Yeah.
that. Like really
Yeah.
just I'm seeing a few trying to do it with mid-century moderns because I mean, who doesn't like a mid-century
Yeah.
modern? You can
Yeah.
find this. Well, you live in California. What is it? Palm is it Palm Springs? I think yeah, it's Palm Springs where
Yeah,
you can go
Palm
and you find all
Springs.
the
Yeah, they've got a lot of those
mid-century
there.
modern.
We also have some Eichlers here in San
Yes.
Francisco. My husband and
Hmm.
I, when we were looking to buy a house, and it's just so astronomically expensive in the
Oh
city,
gosh, yeah.
we passed on this. But an Eichler was up for sale, and those things never go up for sale. And we got to go in one, and I was just, I just love that vibe. It's so good and clean. Although I like to design the really cluttered stuff, I like to live in a nice open, you
Sure,
know,
sure, sure.
mid-century modern look. Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. Are you currently making any like designs, like house designs
That's
right
what
now?
I'm not ready to kind of share anything because
Oh,
I just
sure.
couldn't. That's what I want to do. Well, no, I'm taking a class, an AutoCAD class. Just one of the
Oh,
professors I kept bugging about it, and so he's
nice.
kind of gotten me started with the software. But you really have to learn blueprints, and then of course you're talking about learning that and then
Yeah,
bringing it down to scale. So that
yeah,
that alone, and then I
absolutely.
plan to hopefully. I tried to do it last year, but of course COVID. But really learning woodwork, like I mean, not just kind of cutting things with my X-Acto, but getting in because I'm terrified of the saws and the what
I
are the
know, me too.
rotors and all that stuff.
Me too.
But you really, my friend said, you've got to get
Yeah,
over that.
yeah, I
So
know. It's so true. But I'm such a klutz. I'm like, oh god,
I'm
you
so
know. But
terrified of that. Yeah.
yeah,
And
but yeah,
I
you
just
got to
love
get in there.
woods.
I agree. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome. You're so brave.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So
great.
that's
Yeah, there
my
are
dream.
all these. I love to hear it. I'm really excited to see what you build in design. I got two different types of 3D printers, largely because there are some architectural elements that I want to put in the house.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
that I can't really make as easily with, say, like clay or milliput. There are some people who are really good at it, but I'm like, how did you do that? The swirls and the cherubs, like, no way.
Yes. Yeah.
So I've been exploring like how to do those things. I started using like cake molds, like fondant molds,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
have been kind of interesting and cool. But there are a lot of these elements that you can find online already. You can buy them, or you can like buy or get like a free file and then kind of futz with it, because I'm also, although I design for digital experiences, when it comes to like AutoCAD stuff, when it comes to or I'm using Fusion 360 right now.
Oh
It's
yeah. Uh-huh.
it's I'm still learning a lot, but it's to be able to have the flexibility, like for me, when I think of like a 3D printer, to have the flexibility of printing whatever I want and then painting it up.
Yes.
um,
Yes.
it's like I feel a whole, universe out there waiting to be
Yeah.
explored.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the 3D printing is a really good. It's just propelled us forward. I think the 3D printer, having a
Yeah.
3D printer. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
got one behind me. I borrowed, and again, I
Cool.
just haven't gotten myself together to plug it in and start going. So,
No, I feel you, because I also have a laser printer and I still haven't like
oh
used that
wow,
yet. I'm like, I've got it. I'm in the middle of building it, but I feel like I need to use my other toys and make sure
yeah,
that yeah, there's so much to do. Isn't this so fun?
yeah,
It's just
it's
fun.
great.
Yeah.
And the librarian in me. Now I'm looking. I think I'm looking at what colors here. So the
Oh,
librarian in me. Have you organized your books based
by
on
color.
color?
Yes.
Color, yes.
Yeah. It's because I am such a visual person that I
Yeah,
remember the covers. And so when I'm like, oh, that book, I know that's a bright red book, so I'll just at least look in the bright red section, you
I
know?
love that. I love
Yeah.
that.
But what's so interesting about it is you probably all down here and up they're all black, right?
I've
And
noticed that. Yeah.
it's because they're all scary. Like when you think of like how color is reflected in the
Yeah.
actual material of it, you can start seeing some patterns, which is really cool. Most of the blue books are more informational, which is interesting
Uh-huh.
because blue is like,
Blues,
yeah,
yeah.
it's cool to see that. Yeah, it's all the
Yeah.
spooky
I love
stuff.
that. I love
Yeah,
that. I like that
yeah.
arrangement. So, well, what would you change about the miniature hobby? See, because I see, we've grown up. I certainly grown up with it, just kind of, oh, it's a hobby, but it's really an art. And that's what I'm doing. I'm documenting this by talking with miniaturists, and each time I learn something, and certainly from you today. But
Yeah,
it's absolutely an art form. And I was talking with a miniaturist yesterday, and she said, what's different for me? And I thought that was it. You talked a lot about representation, and I completely that's a big component for me. But accessibility. That we this is introduced in a way that children don't see it as art. It's kind of like, oh, you get a dollhouse, like I just
yeah,
described, or a
yeah,
Barbie, the little Barbie penthouse
yeah,
thing or whatever. But it's not viewed as an art form. But when you're in the world, these are artists. There's a technical aspect to it.
yeah,
They come from backgrounds of design. Most of you have an art history background. I'm going to document all of this. There
yeah.
is some kind of the connection to art.
Oh, that's cool.
Most of them
Oh,
are
I love
saying,
that.
I'm
Yeah,
saying, yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
But go ahead. I asked you a question. I'm sorry, I got off. But
Oh,
yeah,
yeah,
what
no,
would you change anything?
we do know that it's more than that. That is an interesting thing that I've been exploring, especially with some of the subject matter I am exploring it with. Because I'm noticing, like just in terms of the art that is being put out there, that intrinsically I feel like people see doll houses as um, diminishing if they're tackling a thing that is pretty weighty, that in doing it with a dollhouse that it diminishes it or fetishizes it,
Yeah, yeah.
which is so interesting. And it's something that I don't I haven't quite figured out if I want to change that on its head. Yeah, yeah, sure I do actually. I love the fact that people come to me and say, "I never thought that I would be into dollhouses. You showed me that dollhouses could be really interesting and cool. I'm going to make my own dollhouse." And then they go off and they explore and they're creative and they get to explore their creative side. The woman in me, when I think about it, again, I'm obvious and I'm a feminist, and I think about how dollhouses originated. And some research actually, dollhouses weren't necessarily given to children per se. They
No,
were
no.
they were living in the Wunderkammer. They were living in curio cabinets. They were pieces of, like, to be commemorated,
That's
and
right.
be looked at because it was architecture, right? And all the things were made so expertly that it's not for children
Right.
to play with. Um, but when I think about, like, and the concept of dolls generally and how that is all gendered, I think that it's an interesting thing to explore. I'd like to see doll houses used as a medium for other various things, because I think that just in the fact that it is a dollhouse, it says something. I think the mediums that we use definitely say something. I know this is meandering because I'm still trying to figure this out myself, like what I would really want to change about it. I think I'm really in a state of listening so much right now,
Sure.
and kind of putting things out. I have opinions about stuff, but I'm really curious how people take it. Just
Right.
just for as far as like putting art in dollhouse form. Yeah. I
Mhm.
think they're respectable things. They really truly are. And I get asked all the time, is this your job or is this just a hobby? And when someone says just a hobby, I'm like, it's an art piece.
Yes, that's right.
It's an art
That's
piece.
right.
It's an
That's
art
right.
piece. It's not
That's
just
right.
a hobby. It's an art piece. Um, and so, yeah, I think it's a good opportunity to share that with people, and to allow them to see that it is a little bit more than just a little girl thing to do.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And what I will add, what I appreciate particularly, because I'm kind of identifying all these different genres, these little sub areas within the overall sort of miniature art, the kind of spooky, creepy world. What you guys acquire to put your pieces together, that's not a
Mm.
hobby. Just what you've
No.
shared, the taxidermy, and I can't like that's art. And if you think about like what is it the famous one, I can't think of Patronella's because I've been there in Amsterdam, the famous one that's like this massive what is it tortoise shell cabinet, the really
Yeah.
famous one, you've probably
Yeah.
seen it. So that's, I mean, she had the finest artisans and craftsmen of the day to put that together, and I think it's kind of the same thing. That's
Yeah.
not a hobby. Just it
No,
simply
it
isn't.
isn't. My pocketbook definitely tells me it's not a hobby.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in the hours, like and I'm trying to be very um, conscientious of how I do things, and I think through things. I'm talking to, or I've talked to a writer, um, who I won't mention who it is exactly, but they've had some pretty big accolades based on the stuff that they put out there, and they mentioned that they actually will build little room boxes to help them story build and help them think through,
Sure.
what it is they want to write about. And found that to be so interesting because at some point I would really love to write children's books,
Oh
and
yeah.
little spooky, children's books. And so world building and getting the confidence to think that I could actually do that, right? Like in creating a whole fictional world. This has been a really cool tool to do that. Yeah, for sure.
Look, before we go, let me ask you, just because I can't think of the name, because I was kind of going through your post, and there was a famous miniaturist that you really like, and you said, you actually stated that you go back and look over his work, but I mean, it was fascinating. So I can imagine just seeing something right in front of me, but oh, I can't think of his name.
I know.
But everything,
I'm so
it's like
bad with
kind of
names, honestly. Like I mentioned, I'm such a visual person. But I do want to call him out, and I'm going to grab it right now.
you know
So
who I'm talking
I can
about,
look
yeah,
him up. Yeah, I do. So he, I believe he's passed, but he was French, and he
yes,
made the most incredibly like detailed. Hold on, where did you go? Here we
yeah. I was
go.
going to ask if he was still with us, if he had
Jim,
passed, or
Jim, and I might be butchering this. Sevelec,
yes, yes,
Sevellec, born in Paris in the 1930s. I don't know if he's still alive. Ronan Jim Sevelec. But yes, please go. Anyone listening to this,
yeah.
go look them up. They're really quite incredible. I mean, some of these photos I've looked at, and I'm just like,
It's
is that
unbelievable,
real? Hold on, wait, hold on.
unbelievable.
Is that a miniature? I literally could not tell if it was a miniature or not. Um, and yeah, I want to give you a list of all the folks, and I feel like I want to give you a sound bite too, though. So bad with names. Thank you.
And I started talking. I didn't finish my sentence. What I was saying is back to the sort of gender piece. I think that's those of us who really are into like collecting. We kind of turn to Europe, and Germany was kind of, before World War II, but they were kind of first on so many of those fronts. But the gender piece isn't there in the same way. So I think that's and I've been trying to do some research around that, and I've been doing a little digging. But it's a very distinctive thing that happened with our toy industry and dollhouses and the
Oh
Barbies
yeah,
and stuff. But
yeah,
yeah, that I mean, it's documented that it's not dollhouses aren't just kind of a girl's thing. When
yeah.
you
Why do you think
look
that
at some
is? Like,
European.
based on what you had learned, I didn't mean to interrupt you earlier. Sorry.
Oh
What
no,
did,
no,
what
no.
did you learn from that? What
No, I was
can you
just saying
share?
that I read an article. I read an
Oh,
article a few months ago that about just that how many
yeah,
Europeans, like, they buy their male child boys a dollhouse, and it's
yeah,
about design, it's about planning, it's
yeah,
about problem solving, the very
yeah,
things we talked about. There's no
yeah.
gender. You're
Nope.
kind of looking at a house when you're putting it together. It's
Yeah.
planning and rearranging, and then obviously there's some cognitive
I
skills
feel
there for a
like I've seen
child.
dollhouses more. Maybe it's like one of those effects of when you focus on it, like, and you start seeing it in the world around you. But there's a show called The Boys, and I think it's an HBO show. I'm not sure, but it's all of the it's um, about the superheroes that
Oh,
are, what I'm talking about? Yeah.
yeah.
It's really good. It's really
It's
interesting.
good, it is.
One of the superheroes is, full on dude, and he's like really, really focused on this one particular dollhouse, and he gets really mad when anyone comes in and ruins his concentration. And like seeing that, I was like, bless their heart. I'm so glad they showed like, and a very like masculine guy too, who is very just really interested in getting his dollhouse finished. That there's more representation. I think it is really important because it's really silly to think about why it would be such a girly thing. Another thing I do want to comment on that as well, though, is women and domesticity and the relationship between, the being the domestic, or being confined to the domestic.
Yes, yes.
The yellow wallpaper is another really, it's not really Southern Gothic, it is Gothic.
Oh, yes, yes.
And I will be including that with a spontaneous combustion corner where her explosion will have like actually burned part of the house. But and the kitchen, and thinking of what is the domestic space of the kitchen, what's that relationship to a woman, and I'm not putting a stove in there. It's actually a very inoperable kitchen because
Okay,
of
okay.
those things. But the dollhouse in general being an actual domestic structure, and to say that this is only for little girls, we really need to reconsider that, because that's what we're trying to move away from, is gendering these roles that I think are becoming a little bit more equalized. I love that. Actually, too. So, my parents are divorced, and when I was younger, my mom would take me to therapy just to make sure
Mhm.
like I was doing okay.
Sure.
Such a great mom, just making sure that
That's
all
great.
that stuff was. And I remember going into the room, and they had a dollhouse in there, and I was always drawn to it. And I asked her about it, and what it was for, and reflecting back on it, it's easier for children to to express and to communicate by reenacting with doll, and in the house, and like it helps kind of express like um, uh, what their impressions are about gender, about uh, like roles, right, and how roles interact with each other. And I think that making that kind of play, social play like that, an experimental social play available for boys as well, is a very healthy thing.
Yes.
And I think you can also, from that, I understand you can tell a lot about what's going through your child's mind when they're able to recreate these situations. It's going to tell you as a parent what's sticking with them, and will help give you the tools to at least know if something needs to be addressed. So
Yeah,
giving them any
yeah.
kind of play like that, I think, is a really great idea.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Right. Well, this is just wow. We've gone the length there. But let me ask you, as we wrap up, so what's on the horizon? And you've kind of touched on that, but what are you currently working on?
Yeah. Okay, so I am still working on the kitchen. I am legitimately ADD. That's not just me being flippant. I do have ADD, so I tend to kind of go all over the place, and because I get a little bit bored, or I want to So I am trying to focus on one thing, which is the kitchen, and I'm really trying to get it to a spot because I want to start putting the sand dunes in there, which is a call out to Michael McDowell's book, The Elementals. I don't know if you've read it. It's
No, no.
I recommend it. It's really
Okay.
cool. He wrote Beetlejuice.
Mm.
I think he was slated to write Nightmare Before Christmas, but he didn't for reasons. But one of the houses is being swallowed by a sand dune, and
Wow.
I loved that idea. So there are these three houses that are on, like, I don't know what you would call, like, an islet. I don't know, one of those, like, where it's
Hmm.
at night it's an island, in the day it's not.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's inaccessible, or you can't escape it at night, essentially. And there are these three big houses on it, and one of them is being consumed by a sand dune. And it's owned by this family, and the little girl is like looking at it, and there's a lot of mystery shrouded around it. Something had happened in the house. Something lives in the house. And so sand enveloping and taking over a house, in this case, represents the elementals, which are kind of like haints or spirits.
Hmm.
Um, and so I really like the idea of part of the house being consumed as a nod um, to the idea of spirits, like just kind of taking it over. And I just really love that visual. Isn't it cool? Like, you
Yeah,
think
that's
the house full
amazing.
of sand,
That's
being
so
taken
amazing.
over. Yeah, it's
That's
really
so amazing.
interesting.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm working on now. But Yeah, I mean, honestly, I've been working on this for a year, and I'm like looking at this thing, and I'm going to show. I'm like, whoop, that's my phone. I don't know if you can see the light balance.
Yes. Oh, yes.
It is in nowhere near being complete. I'm working on the fine details as I kind of um, uh, jump around from here or there, but I'm hopefully going to have it in a much better place by the end of this year. Um, I don't know how long it usually takes people to make doll houses, but I
Well,
think
it depends on what if it's a kid, it could be a couple months. But what
yeah,
you're talking about, and some of the other people who are just kind of using a concept and really kind of thinking it through, it could be months and months and months, which is
yeah.
a good thing. It's like any art. Well, like any art. Now let me ask you. So the dollhouse, that's not from a kid. Are you just you're building? Are you building the
So
pieces or?
it's part kit.
Okay.
I'm using the kit for some of the walls, but I've blown out a lot of the walls. I've blown out some of the floors, just for for the structure. And I'm thinking I'm going to actually make the top part, the tower part, even taller. I mean, it's over here sitting, waiting to
Oh
be.
wow.
It's going to be a little. So I also opened that up, right? Because I wanted it. It was closed off before, but this is going to be a séance room. Um,
Wow.
I have a chandelier that I had custom made that is like a spirit chandelier. So the idea is like you ask a question and one of the lights will flicker, like yes, no,
Wow.
maybe. And it's all wired to where you'd be able to do that. So I'm trying to figure out how I can electrify it to where if you touch something on the table, the light will actually.
Love it.
Because that's what the spiritualists did, right?
Yes. Yes.
The
Yes.
Fox sisters, like, oh, spooky,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
I just
that's what's on my horizon.
I think, Lauren, I think what people love and what I love, I just think your storytelling, that's really it. It's sort of you're not just creating, people just create miniatures, they build sofas or whatever, but everything I think you're doing has a story behind it.
Thank you. I really
That's
appreciate
really
that.
awesome.
I really
It's
appreciate
just
that, Della.
really
Thank you.
awesome. It's really
I really
awesome.
do appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, do you have any final thoughts, any final thing you'd like to share before we go?
I just want to say I really appreciate you taking the time and chatting with me and being curious around my why I think the way I think and why I do the things I do. I really appreciate that. And to everyone listening, you actually got this far listening to me talk for so long. Like, thank you. I really love connecting with so many people and connecting with people in a really real, authentic way. Um, I'm learning so much, and I feel like I'm getting that connection, especially in the time of COVID, is so necessary. And I'm so grateful for people reaching out and cultivating those very authentic relationships. So that's all I want to say. It's been really wonderful. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure connecting with you on Instagram, and I know everyone feels the same way. So
Thank
it's
you.
just been great, and thank you so much, Lauren.
Thank
Well,
you.
everyone, this has just been great. This is one of my mega interviews. I'm just loving this. So, well, that's all the time we have for this episode, everyone. So please check out my blog, miniaturist.blog, and Lauren's going to have more photos there. But of course, Lauren, before we go, let everyone know how they can connect with you.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on Instagram for the most part. I'm at Southern Gothic Dollhouse. I'm also an older millennial using TikTok now. So if you want
Ah,
to find me on TikTok, I'm putting some of those videos up there on TikTok, and it's also at Southern Gothic Dollhouse. Yep.
right. Well, Lauren, it's been an absolute pleasure today. I've learned so much just chatting with you. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Awesome.
Okay,
Let's not hang up just yet. Let's not.
okay.
Um, so I want to say I know I talked a lot about some issues that you may or may not want to like include in your podcast, and I'm sorry if I went too deep into some of those things. It's just really on my mind right now. So if you want to cut a lot of that down, I fully respect and understand that. Um, that's one of the issues I'm grappling with, and I'm just it's been on my heart and it's given me a lot of anxiety. So, but thank you for talking with me about
No,
these.
it's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure. Well, thanks everyone. Be safe.